Right, hello. Okay, so, long story short, I made a presentation about the UK 2010 general election for my English speaking exam, and I made it a bit too, well, it's supposed to take 5 minutes, and I wasn't even done by that 5 minutes, so I decided to kind of just finish it off fully, talk about it, and upload it, so my class will be freed from this torture. So, let's begin, I guess. So, how significant was the 2010 UK general election? Alright, so the 2010 general election was held on Thursday, the 6th of May, 2010, to elect all 650 members of Parliament in the House of Commons. So, the election was called by Prime Minister Gordon Brown at the time, following 13 years of concurrent Labour government. First headed up by Tony Blair in 1997, and then to 2007. So, in this image below, you can see Gordon Brown calling an election of his cabinet. So you can see Work and Pension Secretary and current Home Secretary Fred Cooper, Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, Alex Darling. I think that's Health and Social Care Secretary Andy Berman, who's current Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. Ed Miliband, who was the current and then Energy Secretary. David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary. I think that's Sadiq Khan as Minister for Transport. He's obviously now the Mayor of London. Then obviously Harriet Harman there, who was the leader of the House of Commons and deputy leader of the Labour Party under Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband. And then there's GB himself, Gordon Brown. I think that's Alex Johnson or Jack Shaw, I can't remember, but let's move on. So, what were the parties like before this election? So, Labour had been in power for 13 years, following Tony Blair's historic landslide. You can see him here. I think this was his 2005 victory speech, or could be a general press conference. Don't really know. Doesn't really matter, I suppose. So Tony Blair stood down halfway through his third term in 2007, and he was succeeded by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown was a close political ally of Tony Blair, and he served as Tony Blair's only Chancellor, and was more of a powerful Chancellor. So following the Conservative defeat in the 2005 general election, the Tories elected David Cameron as the new leader. David Cameron was more of a centrist, fresh, young person to modernise the Conservative Party. Mind you, the Conservative Party has been out of power since 1997. They had John Major, who lost to Blair, William Hague, who lost to Blair, Ian Duncan-Smith, who was then kicked out and replaced with Michael Howard, who then lost to Tony Blair once more. So the Conservatives really needed to try something new, radical, if they wanted to get back into power. And at the same time, they didn't control the Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish Parliament. So they were truly they only controlled councils. So they were truly out of power. Right, so the Liberal Democrats, they just had their best election result in 2005 due to their opposition to the Iraq War under the leadership of Charles Kennedy. However, Charles Kennedy was pressured and I think forced to resign as party leader due to his declining mental health and his addiction to alcohol. So he was succeeded by Mince Cable. Oh my god, the name's gone blank. God. Well, anyway, he was succeeded by someone, and then he was then succeeded by Nick Clegg. So Nick Clegg was also quite a young, fresh, new to British politics. Who was previously a member of the European Parliament for the UK, obviously, and when he became leader, he was only an MP for 2 years at that point, so he was quite new to British politics. So the financial crash was quite also a big factor into this into this election. So the 2008 financial crash was a global economic crisis which occurred following years of unreliable low-interest loans which was going out to the US. So basically what happened is they basically gave loans out with low interest to a bunch of people who couldn't repay them. And when they didn't get the banks to get their money back, they went under. I might be wrong, I probably will be wrong. I know there was tons of other factors, shady factors going behind the scenes, but I think that was the main factor. So this caused the banks to go under, housing bubbles to go bust, and the banks to go under. Trust drag, and since America is and was the largest economy, it dragged the world's economy with it. So, but how does this affect Britain? So it ruined Labour's reputation of handling the economy. Whether it was their fault or not, the economy still crushed under them, and they still had to be, well, not, they still were punished, you know. So the budget deficit increased to 11% of GDP. There was a recession of -4%, and Labour were criticised for not failing to regulate the banks beforehand and to try and prevent it. And as well, a lot of debt increases due to measures to combat the recession. So, however, more importantly in it is the Conservatives framed this crisis as a Labour-made one due to quote-unquote Labour's mass spending. So obviously, beforehand, the Conservatives used to be like, Labour will mass spend, you can't trust them with the economy. However, Gordon Brown ran the economy quite well under Tony Blair. So the Conservatives' big attack against Labour didn't work. So this crisis was enough to give the Conservatives their big attack back onto Labour, which will allow them to hopefully gain power again. So the election of the campaign. So the main major parties in this election was Labour, the Conservatives, and the Liberal Democrats. However, there were some regional parties. You know, you got the Scottish National Party, who I believe controlled Holyrood. Is that what the Scottish Parliament's called again? I think so. And who controlled the Scottish Parliament at the time. You had Plaid Cymru in Wales, the Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, and Sinn Féin both in Northern Ireland. So there were some real regional parties, but these are the main ones. Right, so Liberal Democrats, a further Britain. So here's just some of their parties I picked out. This is not the whole manifesto, but let's just go through it. So they wanted to do Pupil Premium. Pupil Premium would be a program to give more funding to students from poorer backgrounds in order to give them a better start in school. They wanted to change the voting system and replace the House of Lords with a electric chamber. They want to invest in renewable energy, increase the income tax threshold to £10,000 a year, scrap the introduction of ID cards, protect NHS spending, and more importantly, scrapping tuition fees. So, during the campaign, the Liberal Democrats campaigned on a somewhat anti-establishment and somewhat centrist popular platform. They argued that since they've never been in government, they were the only party that would actually achieve true change in British politics. He also ran quite a populist platform among the youth with policies like abolishing tuition fees, education policies, and the opposition to the Iraq War, which was still quite big in 2010. So, the Labour Party, a future for all. Might I say this is Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg, and this is Gordon Brown, Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party. So Labour were promising more of a modest manifesto. So they wanted to protect NHS spending, halve the budget deficit through a number of tax cuts and tax rises, one-to-one tutoring in English and maths for students who were falling behind, expand free childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds, a fully elected House of Lords, and promote digital infrastructure and digital learning, as well as elected police commissioners. So since Labour has been in power, they mainly campaign on their track record in government, like decreasing pension and child poverty, management of the economy, and domestic achievements, like winter fuel payments, which went but now are back as of today, as when I'm filming this. Well, mostly if you earn under £35,000 a year. Anyways, and how they were a safe pair of hands to run the country. So Yeah, so under the new Labour government of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Britain largely was stable. Obviously, you had the Iraq War, but domestically itself, Britain was run quite smoothly. The only big crisis I can name on top of my head was the 2000 fuel crisis, but that was quickly sorted and everyone kind of moved on. So the campaign on the dangers of what a Conservative government could do to public services like the NHS and how the education system would be affected. So, let me get a quick drink. Right, so the Conservative Party vote for change. So they wanted to completely eliminate the budget deficit through a number of cuts and tax rises, reforming the national curriculum and how GDSEs are eroded, how they do them. They want to do independent state schools, which we now know as academies, create an independent NHS board, which we now know as NHS England, and that's now being abolished by this current Labour government. So they want to support nuclear and renewable energy sources, scrap the introduction of ID cards, increase devolution for stronger local government, elected police commissioners, and more importantly, annual cap on EU immigration. Surely this won't come and bite Cameron right back in the bum. So the Conservative Party campaign on change. Change from the last 13 years of the Labour government. We're focusing on how David Cameron has modernised the party by moving the party towards the centre ground in terms of more social and energy policies. I think another catchphrase they used was vote blue, go green. So they really want to emphasise, look, we're not the same old Tories, we are truly different, we are moved, we are different, more modernised. It was more like David Cameron was like the main Tony Blair for the Conservative Party. So the Conservatives also campaign on how Labour can't be trusted with the economy due to their response to the 2008 financial crisis and the budget deficit increasing on it. So they used the catchphrase, not like Labour can't be trusted with the economy, which they still used in 2015, 17, 19, even 2024. You know, but it didn't really work in 2024 due to this trust. So this is kind of like Labour Conservatives' big attack phrase. Labour can't be attacked with the economy. They couldn't do it in 1997, 2001, 2005 due to Tony Blair handling and Gordon Brown handling it all well enough. So, but this financial crash gave them a good excuse to use the old attack lines on Labour once more. So the general election results. So Labour managed to defend many of its swing seats, and the Conservatives failed to achieve a big enough swing to get them, while the Liberal Democrats actually underperformed. They lost 5 seats. They did increase their overall vote percentage. However, they did underperform compared to what polls were predicting. So the election led to a hung parliament where no party controlled a majority in parliament, something that's not really seen in Britain. Theresa May had a hung parliament between 2017 and 2019. I'm trying to remember. 1974 was another hung parliament, but I think apart from that, I feel had majority government. So here's more of the results. So the Conservative went from 198 seats to 306 seats, a gain of 96, and they achieve a 3.7 swing towards them. So David Cameron been leader since 2005, and his seat was Whitney. Labour under Gordon Brown over here, they went from 355 seats all the way down to 258 seats, a loss of 91 seats, and their swing went down by 6.2%. So the little Gordon Brown was, I'm not going to pretend that's some Scottish place. So Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats since 2007, he's represented Sheffield Hallam. So he went from 62 seats to 57 seats, a loss of 5 seats, and they went from 22% of the popular vote to 23% of the popular vote, a gain of 1%. So you can really see the Liberal Democrats quite underperformed. The Conservatives, they gained a crap ton of seats, but they didn't get enough seats in order to form a single Conservative government. So this is what Parliament looked like in a fancy shape I found on Wikipedia, really fancy. So you've got the Conservatives here, DUP there, the Lib Dems, Labour, SNP chilling, the Greens who play economy, all chilling. Alright, so these was the polling since the last election in 2005 to 2010. So Labour held a quite good lead. David Cameron was elected as leader here, so he took over the polls briefly before going down. However, when calls on Tony Blair to resign became louder, Conservative had quite a narrow lead. And then Gordon Brown becomes Prime Minister around here, shoots up in the polls, and however, then he had that scandal about not calling an election. So he went down a little bit. Then 2007, financial crash, bit of a comeback, kind of went down a little bit. Then the election would have been called around here. So you see Labour shot up there, the Conservatives fell a little bit, but they go up towards the end. And however, the Lib Dems here. So the Lib Dems actually were actually not doing that well on the polls. They recovered a little bit more towards the end. But this big jump is what we call Clegg-mania. So Nick Clegg had a really impressive performance in a TV debate. So this led to him getting a lot more media attention and gaining the eyes of a lot of people. So, like I said, we call it Clegg-mania. It was all about, oh my god, Nick Clegg, Nick Clegg, Nick Clegg, Nick Clegg. So the government formation following an election. So we can see David Cameron and Nick Clegg there. Nick Clegg became Deputy Prime Minister and Cameron became Prime Minister. Alright, so a hung parliament. So since the Conservatives was the largest party, they could either form a minority or a coalition government with the Lib Dems, which would give them a majority. Yeah, so Cameron was the largest party. He could have gone in with a minority government. However, that would have been quite difficult. Theresa May chose to go with a minority government with a supply and confidence agreement with the DUP, but that still made her life quite hard. Because if the Conservatives went with a minority government, they would have to find 20 MPs to support their bill. So if they chose with a minority government, we probably would have been back in another general election in a few months' time. So the only really logical way forward for them was a coalition agreement with the Lib Dems. So Nick Clegg did promise he would talk to the largest party first before going to the second, in this case the Conservatives. So talks for a coalition deal did happen between between Labour and the Lib Dems. Sorry, I'm lost. So yeah, so the Conservative side talked with the Lib Dems on how to make a deal. But it was important to note that Labour and Lib Dem talks did start towards the end of the Conservative ones. Like, I think it was due to constitutional reform, like the Conservatives weren't budging enough. So, and the talks were about to break down. So, talks between Labour and Lib Dems just started. I can't remember who headed them up on Labour side, but I know that it was Ed Balls, Ed Miliband, Harry Harman, Peter Manson, and one other lord who headed up the Labour side. So, however, even if Labour made a coalition deal with the Lib Dems, they would have not had a majority. They would have been, I think, around 310 seats, so they would have been 15 seats short. So for the Lib Dems, it probably made more political sense to go with the Conservatives, because they would have got that majority, and it would have just been a lot more easy instead of constantly going around begging parties for votes and agreement. So, oh, my image broke. Alright, so the Cameron-Clegg coalition formation. No, that's really ruined my date, that. So on the 11th of May, after 5 days, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems agreed to a coalition deal. So the deal will see multiple Lib Dem MPs become cabinet members, like Nick Clegg, who became Deputy Prime Minister. Ed Davey became Energy Secretary in 2012. So, and the deal saw multiple Liberal Democrat policies become law. So, yes, the Lib Dems. So the cabinet was still Conservative dominated, as they were still the largest party, but the Lib Dems did control some departments. So, some cabinet seats and government departments. So obviously they controlled the Department for Energy and Climate Change. Ed David became secretary in 2012. They controlled the Department for Business, that was headed up by Vince Cable for the whole of the 5 years. And they also controlled the Scottish office, as the Conservatives actually had no MPs in Scotland. So you kind of had to give, and the Lib Dems had a lot of Scottish MPs, so it makes sense to give the Scottish Secretary of State of Scotland to the Scottish MP. They also controlled the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, who kind of the Chancellor, second in command for the Chancellor. That was Danny Alexander. So the Lib Dems, they control some departments, but they did control quite a lot of junior minister roles, which were going out to a number of MPs. So this is what Parliament looked like after, this is what Parliament actually looked like. Conservative and Lib Dem MPs all sit on the government benches. Labour, since they're the second largest entity, they became the most royal, Her Majesty's most loyal or royal opposition. So Labour at the time, so Gordon Brown didn't become leader of the opposition, he just resigned as leader immediately. His deputy, Harry Hom, became leader of the opposition from around May to September, before being succeeded by Ed Miliband for the whole of the Parliament. So, what were the achievements of this coalition? So we had the Marriage Savings Couple Act of 2013, so that allowed same-sex marriage to be legalised in the UK. A pupil premium, increased funding for disadvantaged students. Transport investment, like high speed rail 2, HS2. Renewable energy investment, the Localisation Act of 2017. So this laid the foundation to what we now know as metro mayors. So there's quite a couple. You've got Manchester, Liverpool, rest of England. Oh my god, I forgot. Horn. Oh, I'm not. Yeah, that's like 10 metro mayors. Decrease in unemployment, and the tax-free allowance increasing to £10,600 a year. However, there were a lot of failures of this coalition, which would come back to bite the Conservatives quite big. So, and the Lib Dems especially. So they failed to get a grip on immigration as promised. So Cameron promised to get it down to the tens of thousands. 198,000 over target. There was a massive tuition fees U-turn, which the Lib Dems were punished painfully for. Austerity, so we saw a rapid growth of food bank use. It slowed economic growth. It damaged public services. It increased inequality. It made the poor poorer. It was a brutal series of cuts made by the Conservatives in order to balance the budget. They did not go through constitutional reform like the House of Lords. Even right, the House of Lords were pretty much untouched, so they didn't really go for. And then we had the Health and Social Care Act 2012. So it increased private involvement in the NHS and made NHS England, which is now going bye-bye. So the end of the coalition. So the coalition was dissolved on the 8th of May 2015, following the Conservatives winning a majority of 10 seats, or 8. Anyway, it was a small majority. Like, Cameron would have had a he would have been able to get some things done, but more controversial things, he would have had a hard time with his backbenchers due to the weak majority. So, anyways, so the coalition was dissolved from Cameron forming the second Cameron ministry following his party's success at the 2015 election. And the Lib Dems in the 2015 election went from 58. Shouldn't it be 58? Wait, 1 sec. Oh no, 57. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the Lib Dems lost 49 of their 57 seats. So some seats survived, like Sheffield Hallam, Nick Clegg's seat, and then Southport, my constituency. With many multiple MPs, Lib Dem MPs losing their seat. Like Vince Capel, who was the business secretary, Joe Swinson, who was a minister in the cabinet office, if I'm right, and Davey, who was the energy secretary. They also lost Danny Alexander, who was the chief secretary to the treasury. But it is important to note in 2017, a lot of Lib Dem MPs who lost their seat did return, like Joe Swinson, Vince Cable, and Davey, who all later became party leaders. But also it forced the resignation of Liberal Democrat Party leader Nick Clegg due to, well, the painful election result, really. We went from 57 seats to 8. Yeah, you kind of had to resign after that. So, why is this election so significant? Well, quite a lot of notable MPs we now know were actually elected in this election. So, Dominic Raab was one. He was Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Justice under Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, and was also Foreign Secretary and Brexit Secretary under Theresa May. Rachel Reeves. So she was Shadow Works and Pension Secretary under Ed Miliband, Shadow Chancellor and now current Chancellor under Sir Keir Starmer, and Caroline Lucas, MP for Brighton Pavilion between 2010 and 2024. She was the first ever Green MP ever and leader of the Green Party multiple times. Liz Truss was actually elected in this election. So MP for South West Norfolk between 2010 and 2024. She lost her seat in 2024, skill issue, to Dan Norris. No, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg. Never mind. She was British Prime Minister for 49 days, was beaten by electors. She was Foreign Secretary under Johnson and Secretary for International Trade. As well as I believe she was Farming and Environmental Secretary under Theresa May and Justice Secretary as well. So it laid the foundations to Brexit, this election. It defined the Conservative Party on the issue of Brexit back into Parliament, with many powerful Conservative MPs like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Michael Gove supporting a referendum. However, so one of the reasons why Cameron called a referendum was because of in 2014 or 13, towards the end of 13, I think, polling looked poor. Cameron was in a minority government. He was behind the Labour Party in polls. UKIP was increasing, and he felt pressured to kind of call a referendum in order to fight off UKIP. And as well as the referendum was also a party management. Well, supposedly, Cameron kind of gave this referendum to his backbenchers as, well, meat for them to chew on and eat on, so they can stop bickering about EU and to put the issue of Europe in the party to rest. And also that's Nigel Farage, so chairman of UKIP, leader of UKIP, MEP, that will now know him as the leader of Reform UK and MP for Clacton. So it kind of caused internal Labour issues this election. So the election saw the end of the New Labour era, as proposed. So New Labour was like a project by Gordon Brown and Tony Blair to modernise the party and get it back into power, which they achieved. So Gordon Brown was resigned as Labour leader following the election, and he was succeeded by his current and then his and current Energy Secretary Ed Miliband. He was then replaced by Jeremy Corbyn following the 2015 election defeat. So Corbyn's time as leader was quite, well, troublesome. He wasn't taken seriously. He had to do with a leadership rebellion in 2016 with Owen Smith. He didn't look Prime Minister ready, and there was a lot of defections like Change UK. And the party's kind of just was just a lot more weaker. He wasn't the Tony Blair. He was more of a, I don't really know how to describe Jeremy Corbyn. He was an interesting party leader, but just someone not being able to get the party back into power. But more importantly, it led to 14 years of Conservative government. So the Conservative election saw the return of the Conservatives through 8 different governments, 2 headed up by David Cameron, 2 headed up by Theresa May, 2 headed up by Boris Johnson, 1 by Liz Truss, and 1 by Rishi Sunak. They saw a number of crises and flawed policies. Brexit was a crisis. Theresa May losing her Brexit deal vote. Then you had the Johnson crisis, the vote of no confidence. Also, these 14 years, we just generally saw weak prime ministers due to internal party division, party rebellions, and then parliament structure. So that would have been like a hung parliament that Theresa May had in order to get Brexit. So obviously, we all know that the Conservatives rightly lost the 2024 election just due to being so incompetent. So many issues have occurred. They just kind of lost the plot when Johnson came into power. It just was although it looked good originally, it was just downhill from Johnson. Johnson was always going to be probably a disaster. Probably, but COVID didn't make him a disaster. He was always going to be one anyway. So yeah, that's it. So I do hope you kind of enjoy me rambling on for half an hour. So if you're interested, I'll make more, but I don't know. But anyway, so if you enjoy, thanks for watching. I guess can understand it probably was quite painful to listen to me ramble on about this for half an hour, but there you go.